Today I'm going to be talking about governance by things. So it's a question because I'm not yet sure what I'm going to make this project about. But I have a lot of, a great number of events that have been taking place. They seem to have a clear trajectory, are leading to, they've already led to some pretty important questions that I want to unpack that deal with how we might not just theorize and define, but how we might identify big data infrastructures that are being created. And not big data infrastructures because big data as a revolutionary phenomenon has affected several industries. The industry or space, if you will, the institutional environment, I'm interested in identifying the activities surrounding big data infrastructures are particularly in the space of state power, state governance of populations. And to kind of lead in with maybe a provocative example here, I've clipped out for you just last week. I came across another one of another story coming out of China about the Shanghai government saying that people who fail to visit their parents will have their credit scores lowered. Anybody from China here?
Yeah.
Are you from Shanghai by any chance?
I come from Beijing.
Beijing.
But perhaps it encourages young people to frequently come back.
Yes, very much so.
So the government of Shanghai says that under new rules, residents who fail to visit their elderly parents will get black marks on their credit records. Yes.
So I know that there is quite a lot of location monitoring in China, but how does Shanghai intend to implement this?
So the short answer is we don't know, and the conceptual kind of question that I'm approaching this with is the question of what is this a case of? So I am let's get to that slide. Some of you who I've had the pleasure of meeting today have seen the slide, but just to introduce kind of my where I'm anchored and sort of where I'm going and have consistently been going over the years. I'm Muzammil Hussain I have 3 degrees in communication, broadly construed. All of them are different. Strategic communication, where I spend a lot of time thinking about psychology and individual behaviors. That was a long time ago. Most of my work that I have built from and contributed to is in political communication and what I guess we're calling global communication broadly today. So global. So I tend to define myself as someone who studies international politics not only through the lens of a communication industry, but particularly to unpack the ways in which communication systems, communication technologies can shape the agency of citizens to participate in their societies. And oftentimes for me, this means looking outside of the United States because most of our scholarship comes from the United States, and even if you account for Europe, we only get about 20% coverage from the rest of the world. So I'm very much invested and have been since 2005 in thinking about political communication and civic engagement through technology diffusion in places that are non-democratic and developing and industrializing, so rapidly changing environments where I think actually most of the most important action and most important places where we can test our theories and see how far they travel or develop new theories can be done in very powerful ways. This project that I'm describing today and providing, this is not my first public talk about this, so I'm actually probably not going to talk for a very long time because I want to have a discussion about it to really kind of hash out with you how I can frame the boundaries of the project and think about ways of thinking about questions that might be asked along the way. So this project is called, the acronym is Big Dig, just stands for Big Data Innovation and Governance. And as I hinted earlier, it's about big data innovation and governance applied to studying how powerful governments are constructing data environments to observe, monitor, and coordinate the activities of their state surrounding their societies. Since 2010, so I've been doing this since 2005, it's been a little over a decade now, but about halfway through, I began expanding my work to address how both governmental and civil society actors were increasingly interlocked with private technology companies to better serve the organizational and operational concerns of governments. So I spent the first half of my career so far thinking about how authoritarian and non-democratic governments try to control and censor their populations from media content, primarily through digital spaces. But it became more and more apparent that limiting the study just to a particular layer of the communication environment was ignoring a much more fundamental and deeper process that's worth communication scholarship to engage with. So for example, let me give you some current examples. Consider the fact that in the aftermath of the San Bernardino shootings, the FBI has attempted vigorously to coerce Apple to lower its device security to gain access to the shooter's mobile device metadata. Apple and other companies have responded critically, arguing that in today's environment, it is better security that is actually required, not device keys for governments, whoever they are, to make the communication systems even less secure than they tend to be. And the evidence that they point to and channel is the fact that the same governments that are asking for lowered security settings aren't able to manage and secure their own systems to begin with. So this is from, this is a hearing, House Committee on Oversight and Government Reform, in the aftermath of the OPM hacks in July of 2015. So the US federal government was hacked. The investigative journalists and policy wonks who focus on this part of public policy have made statements like, well, we think the hacks can be traced to Beijing. So clearly, cyberspace and cyber politics are already involved in a lot of international politics. And so in this environment where 21, I think, million federal employees' data was stolen right out of the hands of the US federal government, companies like Apple are saying, well, we have more than just public concern in mind, we actually have also a company that we want to keep functional. And so these kind of requests are damaging in many ways. And so these companies have pushed back at these requests, but the bigger point here is that more and more private sector companies are not only intimately involved in relationships with government, they're being sort of encroached upon in very direct ways that are giving us reason to observe and think about what the role of private tech companies are in the instrumentalization of various governmental tasks, like providing security, creating an environment where economic stability, social stability, and social services can be delivered. And it seems that communication technologies have become incredibly intimately involved, certainly in current events. Furthermore, the demise of global leaders like Blackberry due to the failure to keep up with innovation, with the innovation value chain, and suffering blowbacks from state powers, has led to a new market being created. So, what I mean by that is, this is BlackBerry's experience. So, you guys remember BlackBerry?
Yes.
I have to ask this when I talk about this in my, I guess, undergraduate classes. People don't remember, which is a pretty profound thing. BlackBerry was the one that made popular smartphones to the global market by appealing to C-level executive international business leaders. And what the device was fundamentally about was a secure communication system, not just a mobile, functional communication system. First and foremost, it was its market lead in having the world's most secure communication system at its time. During, actually not during, but in the months before the Arab Spring, just between August 2nd to August 10th, in the Arab Middle Eastern states, these 7 different Arab states came out and tried to coerce BlackBerry to change their security settings, essentially to put, tried to coerce the Canadian company, Research in Motion, to put local servers in-house so that the regimes could monitor the communications for national security needs. So this is not unheard of. Many states do this. Democratic states do this as well because they make the claims and make the arguments that it is their responsibility to provide safety and to protect their borders, and having a private communication system can disable limit their ability to do so. It's the same argument that the FBI is making towards Apple today. By the way, I want to give credit to Sami Ben-Garbia, who's a well-regarded civil society researcher and activist who became very prominent through the Arab Spring for tracking these things. Because when we actually look up this case, when we look up who's written about it, how much coverage journalists have given to this issue, we usually just walk away with this regard. But actually there's an established history that we could easily forget, which is states have consistently tried to interfere with private companies' ability to function effectively. So the second point of what I was saying was that this has led to an environment where there's a lot of both opportunistic but also very creative innovation happening from the private sector to continue filling in the needs for well-paying customers as well as the needs that are becoming present in the market. This is a PGP creator. Is anybody familiar with PGP? Pretty Good Privacy. I don't use it, but I'm told it's pretty easy to learn to have pretty good privacy. I believe Facebook recently, in the aftermath of the Arab Spring and the Occupy protests and various governments trying to hack their system, created an opportunity for PGP verification to be secured in your Facebook profiles itself. So the point here is that technology is constantly evolving, and there is an ever-growing market now about concerns of privacy and security, not just from the perspective of states, but from the perspectives of paying customers who want tools that can provide them the service that, as they read the news, they're seeing their state leaders cannot effectively be expected to provide for them. Because they themselves are coming to private sector actors and saying, actually, we would like for you to just lower your defenses so we can have access that we need to provide our security. So there are a few paradoxes here, just in these maybe 3 or 4 examples that I've given so far. And the paradox here is that our personal devices, including online communication, mobile phone metadata, and other personal devices like Fitbits, now generate data in ever-growing clouds that track much of our activity and digitize much of our day-to-day behaviors, archive much of our social expressions and thoughts, even as we put our content and writing in cloud servers. And in this increasing world governed by the Internet of Things, or at least organized by the Internet of Things, these data infrastructures have become the battlegrounds for tensions between governmental agencies and private citizens. It's a pretty broad statement, but we're going to start getting pretty specific here. So what does big data innovation have to do with governance today? This is the kind of broad questioning that I'm beginning this project with. State powers and private industries have historically and symbiotically implemented new ICTs to advance their operational goals, primarily to improve their managerial efficiency and effectiveness. So to summarize a whole slate of business and industry literature and even multidisciplinary literature on this topic, we can say make three big claims, I think. The Industrial Revolution of the early to mid 20th centuries has been described as a period when public and private institutions learned to automate their operations by designing technologies to complete the work previously done by human agents. So information technologies of the time, like indexing systems, folders to organize content, allowed for information retrieval more easily than before. The IT revolution of the mid to late 20th century has been described as a period when a new generation of ICT infrastructure enabled widespread lateral connectivity between publics. So it was no longer for making organizations more efficient. The communication technologies went laterally and began to connect individuals. So not just the mass media communication systems, but particularly telephones. Even you can think very low-tech postal systems became more efficient and more used. So as individuals, we have become increasingly more connected to other individuals and in larger groups in exponential ways. And finally, in turn, so the data revolution that I've been describing of the nascent 21st century can be described as having introduced deeper relational opportunities for marrying device data with user networks. So user networks in the second phase, mid to late 20th century, we all became connected, but now we're also connected more and in greater detail described and recorded through the devices that we carry. So the data shadows that we create and produce are incredibly rich, and they're powered through the expansions of mobiles, wearables, and the Internet of Things. The important point here is that states are centrally involved in constructing many of these periods of technology development. So it's worth asking a few research questions that I think these observations and provocations have at least lead me to. What do state powers hope to marshal from today's big data infrastructure projects for their governance, interests, and goals? Because we know states are creating big data infrastructures. So at some point soon, we'll begin to think about what are they, how many are there, and so that we can think about what do they want to get out of these massive infrastructures that they're constructing. Where and when are private tech companies, tech sectors being engaged in constructing and instrumentalizing the needs, the demands, and the imaginations of state actors, and instrumentalizing these infrastructures for those into governance technologies. And finally, how might these developments restructure the evolving relationships between states and citizens, between consumer society and public culture, especially in varying conditions of democratization and development? So the project on big data innovation and governance broadly examines both public and private sector efforts to construct massive platforms to collect, organize, and instrumentalize population-level data about citizens and consumers. Specifically, very practically looking forward about how this work is being done and when I hope to kind of begin concluding things through this exercises. Between 2016 and 18, this project is cataloging all of the known big data infrastructure projects explicitly being collected about their populations in order to help improve, make more efficient, or increase the capacity of their governments to function as governments. But there are two specific infrastructures that we've already identified that are probably even most central to the project, and they are India and China's big data infrastructures, which I will unpack in the following slides. The point here is that actually one kind of specification. We've identified out of 170 countries that Polity 4, so a pretty robust ranking of democratization experiences across nation states since 1840, I want to say, documents now about 170 nation states. And so we started that as a sampling frame and we designed a search methodology with 3 expert graduate students to go and find all of the known databases that exist. Of 170, 164 we were able to find big data governance infrastructures about populations, and of those 164, we have 408. So on average, each country actually has about a minimum of 2 to an average of 3, and I think the highest number of data infrastructures we found were 5, and that was for the UK. So UK citizens enjoy being digitized and documented by their government in mass, much more than any others. Which isn't surprising if you kind of know about the context in the UK. It's one of the countries where, I believe in London, there are more video cameras recording human behavior than there are people that live there.
Across England as a whole, I think it's the highest density of cameras.
Part of the inspiration for this work came from my own kind of obsession. I became very intrigued with biometric technologies because I worked for those 5 years. I was working on studying how activists were using technologies. One of the common ways in which the technologies backfired on them was this story that I heard a lot in Beirut. I heard this story again and again about activists in Syria using social media and communication devices to organize themselves like they have organized themselves in Occupy Wall Street and in all corners of the world. But the pitfall they were experiencing was the Syrian regime not only has an electronic Syrian army that's been well documented by journalists and policymakers or international observers, but there was this interesting case that I heard several times where one of the methods that the Syrian regime used to identify movement leaders was by uploading pictures of protesters into Facebook's face recognition system and began to identify through the face recognition algorithm which were the most common faces in the crowd, which gave them an idea that maybe these were the movement leaders because they were present more often than others. So that's obviously problematic and unfortunate that that's the story, but it tells us that we shouldn't limit our assessment to technologies that are popular to be studied today, but we should also be looking forward to what the new slates of technologies are being included in processes of governance, in this case, engaging in civil war against your own population. I've reviewed some of these questions, but part of on the kind of deeper sense of this study that I'm pondering on or percolating on right now is, since we've identified these 408 data infrastructure, we're asking ourselves in my team, what is novel about these things? And more importantly, what might be the fundamental focus of this particular project? So the exercise of collecting the 408 population data infrastructures has been useful because we've identified that across the board, most countries have now incorporated or are rapidly incorporating biometric tools into their data infrastructures. And it's growing at an expansive rate. So one of our goals, now that we have this index of cases, is to begin, I guess you can call it coding, or adding metadata from our perspective in identifying when did these projects start, who were the vendors that developed them, what kind of technologies are we talking about. We have a good number of cases where many countries have not they have not collected DNA samples of their whole population, but they've collected DNA samples of substantive subpopulations. So Canada is one of these interesting examples where there are groups of ethnic groups of Canadians that the Canadian government has official receptacles of their DNA traces. In India, it's retina scans and fingerprints. That's where biometrics are going. In China, as I'll describe, it's a much more complex and robust case of combining and aggregating social media data and instrumentalizing them towards making decisions about giving loans, making decisions about who's more or less employable, based on a social ranking system that takes into account various indicators. So one of the background points here that I'd like to make is we don't know where the technology is going, but it's never too soon to start tracing the process by which we end up in interesting eventualities. This is the way that I tend to think of the world these days. Most of us spend our time up there in the top right quadrant. That's blue is Western democracies. The x-axis moving right is more democratic. The y-axis moving up is more stable. So, since most of our efforts are focused in this corner, but we also know that big data infrastructures are being created across the board. We have this profound diversity of experiences and situations where governance itself is a legitimate concern. I believe, I'm not an anti-statist, I'm not an anarchist, I believe that government should be able to operate and conduct its functions. But that being said, we know that given the political cultures and the political systems, we're bound to find a lot of very interesting narratives about what tools get designed, how problems get defined, and how eventually citizens end up experiencing the societies where that are technologically constructed around them through these interesting collaborations between private sector elites and governments who are trying to organize them.
Can you decode the colors? Blue,
Oh, sure.
Red, communists?
Red was,
South America.
no, this is Sub-Saharan Africa. So purple is Sub-Saharan Africa. Red is Middle East, North Africa. And green would be Latin America.
Yellow.
Latin America, so a little bit more developed, a little bit more democratic. And yellow is East, Southeast, and South Asia. So India, China. So the two cases that I'm going to tell you the most about today are these two spheres. Similar, I mean, China is more, well, these are stability rankings, but if they were development rankings, this bubble would be higher because India is less economically developed. But one is less democratic, one is more democratic, both in political culture as well as in governmental practice and institutions. So let's talk about what these cases are. I've got two cases. One is called the social credit infrastructure, that's China. The other is the Aadhaar project, and that's in India. And I've said a few things about it, but here are some additional details. This project, the Aadhaar India project, is already under deployment. 999 million Indian citizens are now biometrically encoded, and their data and identities are warehoused in servers in Bangalore, India, where I happen. That's my first home. I've had a couple of homes. Spent a decade in India and Bangalore, a decade in Cleveland in the Midwest, and now a decade in higher ed in various places. So this one kind of hits home for me in an interesting way. And China is a very new case, and I'm heading out to do field work in Hong Kong. I'm starting in Hong Kong, not in mainland China, because most of the tech companies and technocrats who are being hired to design these systems are actually international. Multinational banking companies and consulting companies are helping construct China's, you can call it social management infrastructure. And so even though it's being asked for and done by Beijing, it's a multinational, transnational project that's being constructed. The other difference here is that this project is under development. It's not been deployed yet, but the finish date has been set by the federal government there. By 2020, all Chinese citizens are to have a hierarchical ranking system stating their social credit worthiness, and that system must be functional and instrumentalized by the year 2020. So India's is almost done, but in many ways, India is actually just getting started. So let's get into the cases themselves. The Aadhaar project. It is a biometric and demographic citizen ID infrastructure, and how I understand it, how I'm comparing it to the Chinese case. The unique identification project in India, running under the brand name Aadhaar, is a citizen ID project. It started in 2009, and it assigns a unique 12-digit number to all citizens. We, at least here in the States, we know something similar. It's the Social Security number. What makes it different, though, is that the number is linked to biometric info. Scans of fingerprints, faces, and irises. And as demographic information, name, date of birth, gender, and residential address are also relationally connected to the system. As of March 2016, it's the largest national biometric database in the world, with all of the data being stored in India's central information data repository in its IT capital, its Silicon Valley, Bangalore, South India. While the project was originally presented by the state government, the implementing partners and select media outlets have framed it as a technological innovation aimed at helping the government to provide residents with easier and more efficient access to social benefits. So the entire project has been justified from the beginning as India is a developing country with a massive population that the population needs services. Some of them just entail delivering basic subsistence like food and health care. And because India doesn't have even though it does have one of the most expansive bureaucracies in the country, it's dysfunctional and not efficient in providing the services it needs. And so this rapidly advanced high-tech system has been promised to be the fundamental infrastructure upon which more services can be built and innovated by the private sector. But it's also been critiqued by Indian civil society. India's civil society is the largest collection of CSOs in the world. So India has the largest number of civil society organizations, and many of them, the unanimous voice coming out of Indian civil society has been one of alarm, outrage, and dissatisfaction with this project. So Indian civil society has been active and critically understanding of what's going on and taking positions and judging and evaluating the project as it's unfolding. For example, or a quote, Indian legal scholars have argued that while the RTI, the Right to Information Act, makes the state transparent to the citizen, the UID, the Aadhaar project, does the inverse. It makes the citizen transparent to the state. So immediately and very obviously there's issues of privacy concerns that are being called upon here. So although the project is structured as a government project, private industries, particularly large IT firms, are closely involved in the project since its inception. The first chairperson, Nandan Nilenkani, is the ex-CEO of Infosys, one of India's 2 or 3 largest IT companies operating around the world today. In a 2012 interview, he described the project as a national-level online ID management platform and hinted very clearly at his hope to see young entrepreneurs to use the data infrastructure that this system creates to expand the scope of governance to the consumer industry as well. So one of the hopes is not only to expand the governmental capacity, but allow the private sector, consumer sector, to marketize the Indian population in more efficient ways than it's organized at the moment. Just, what is it, like 2 months ago, the Aadhaar application hackathon just happened in India. The aim of the hackathon was to gather thousands of young tech specialists. Let me skip and I'll come back. So the point of this hackathon was to bring together some of the brightest minds to begin using the data infrastructure that's already been created to design apps on top of the biometric infrastructure. Now that seems like a standard experience of how things get done as major projects give birth to other sub-projects and get expanded. But in India, it's an interesting case because the federal government has gone back again and again to push back the boundaries of what's legal. The project started as, this data will never be housed anywhere other than this space. To now we're at a point where not only is the data shared with various actors and various private sector actors, the concerns that civil society rightfully have raised about how secure is this when we know governments can't manage their own systems and we have these massive systems threatening our own personal identity information. The consistent process since this project has advanced has been to make it more and more open and available for co-optation from various other sectors. And it's not just Indian private civil society, or it's not just the Indian private sector that's being outsourced to, because of the formation of multinational companies and how they operate. Effectively, the data is being shared, presumably in places outside the Indian territory. I forgot to explain this. This is some of the advertising that the Aadhaar project started with, which is, that's a kerosene tank in India. Most people use kerosene to cook in their kitchens. Gas lines aren't well connected to most urban areas even. And so that's a basic form of subsistence for poor people because you need that to be able to cook your food. And the government gives out a lot of these tanks. You can see them all over urban areas in India, trucks rolling around with huge collections of these, both empty and full kerosene. So that was some of the advertising they did across villages and urban and rural areas in India to get people on board. And it's been one of the most efficiently organized state infrastructures India has ever seen. Getting 999 million people into a system within a decade is a feat for any type of government, let alone a developing government that's usually been described as corrupt, lethargic, and inept in conducting most of its functions. So in contrast, China's planned social credit project is a governmental initiative that aims to combine the data environments that already exist across China. They aim to combine financial data of Chinese citizens with social data about their communication patterns, the social networks that they've expressed by connecting to people on Chinese social media sites, and behavioral data based on what the devices now log about their movement, which taxis they take. Think of all the metadata that now we're surrounded by in the world of surrounded by the Internet of Things. But in order to combine these, the government has had to partner with, in contrast to the Indian case, it has had to go out of its way to partner with private companies both within and outside of China. Let me say a little bit more about the social credit score itself. While receiving a social credit score is currently optional, so just like India, India's project started as optional, but now 999 million people are in it. By 2020, even though it's optional now, by 2020, every Chinese citizen will have a mandatory government-issued credit score that identifies their honesty and trustworthiness. So these concepts are going to be operationalized through big data scientists and policymakers who are going to define and come up with computational methods to make conclusions about one's honesty and trustworthiness. Currently, it's both a rapidly advancing project, but one mired in confusion about exactly what's being asked. So there are official agencies and a national plan to create this system, but because it's something that the state has imagined as wanting by a certain date, the messy work of producing it is unfurling as we speak. In the early stages of implementation, there were 8 private credit rating agencies collecting data using algorithms, and they were already producing credit scores for citizens, and they included big giants like Tencent and Alibaba, so China's Amazon, and the collection of financial and social media companies under Tencent's umbrella. 12 more companies are currently awaiting licenses from the government to participate in this. So it's a lucrative it's a very rich environment if you're a company to be involved in, because of not just the revenue you can generate by partnering on this massive project, but the future revenue of all the different applications that are being imagined as making use of a social credit system. So the kind of things that journalists so far have written about are, if you're using a Airbnb type service, it might be useful to know whether somebody is trustworthy or not. Unfortunately, I think we have recently a story in Michigan where somebody went haywire with Airbnb. So we can imagine ways where these might be valid governmental tools. So my point here is not just to raise alarm as much of the Western journalistic institutions organizations have raised alarm and raised questions only of 1984-esque concerns, but more to say various governments continue to do this illegally. So actually, if we're going to talk about illegal methods of doing this, we can look at our own government here in the United States and the massive ways in which our security agencies have gone behind our backs and constructed big data infrastructures to detect our habits and to protect us from nefarious terrorists, but done so clearly in ways that violate our civil rights and not just violate our civil rights, they're outright illegal methodologies. So the point is that all governments engage in this work. China and India are in a fascinating position right now in world history where they're designing very similar systems, although the technologies themselves are very different. By partnering with car rental companies, hotels, dating websites, and the Chinese central bank credit ratings like Sesame Credit, Tencent and Honest Credit have merged internal consumer data to form digitized repositories of social, economic, and behavioral characteristics of the Chinese population. The exact algorithms used by the different rating companies that are coming up with different versions of the credit systems are not exactly known. So for the public or even the government to make intelligent decisions about which system to go with is mired in levels of lack of transparency and understanding about how these things are calculated and whether or not they can deliver on the behavioral and policy and governmental decisions that are going to be made about people. Let's kind of start here. So we have this international data set. India and China are the directions we're moving in terms of fieldwork this year and next year. We'll be mapping, doing an ethnographic study of moving sideways because we're already up in the institutional sort of upper echelons looking at these very governance-laden projects. But more importantly, what we're observing both in India and China is the massive cross-industry collaborations that are required to construct these things. And I'll end with this. This is Zest Finance. So just to reiterate, these are not just issues happening in India and China. Zest Finance is a San Francisco-based company that produces social credit scores for American consumers. The founder engages in the same big data decision-making and innovation designs, and they try to explain sort of how they come towards the scoring mechanisms so that we can, in the United States and capitalist or Western industrialized capitalistic markets, we can use more fully the capacity that's we're surrounded by the data that's being generated about us. So these innovations are not happening in a location in a country. They're happening around the world in order to be instrumentalized in specific governmental locations. The overall frame that we're building from at the moment with this project, at least in the ethnographic portions of it, is to begin to unpack the innovation value chain that's being constructed, at least in the India and China case. Because by using this logic, we're seeing opposites, even though there's a lot of similarities between the cases. It's opposites because in the case of India, a lot of the instrumentalization of the big data infrastructure is not yet there because India lacks the basic bureaucratic infrastructure to bring together and commodify the citizens to begin with. So the biometric project really is to collect all Indians and identify them in a system that can be relationally connected to other tools, devices that are now being imagined. Just recently, India, the Aadhaar project experienced its first instrumentalization where a private company, a web company created a payment system where you could log in and make payments with your Aadhaar identity as opposed to using just a credit card and providing corroborative location and postal information to make payments. On the other hand, in China, the innovation value chain is even more further ahead, even though the project is newer. The Indian project is older, but in terms of complexity and capability, it's actually much further behind than the China case. In the Chinese case, the basic infrastructure is already present. Various data environments exist, and so the state's responsibility has been to marshal all of those various organizations together and make them work together to construct a meta level ranking system by combining the various individual identification sources that exist in the financial sector, in the social media and communication network environment, as well as the various tools and apps people use to navigate day-to-day consumer and private life. I'm open for questions and comments. Please let me know what your thoughts are.